assume that everyone found this poem hard. If you didn't find this poem hard, something is wrong with you. If you think this was just easy, because no one in the English language has ever written like this. This poem is written in a very elaborate way. I'll try to talk a little bit about why that is. But if you found it hard going, line by line, if you found yourself reading along and you read a few lines and then said, wait, I haven't got the slightest idea what it is I just read, don't be alarmed. This is not at all a strange experience. Virtually every reader has this experience. And moreover, it's not clear to me that Milton didn't want you to have this experience. He knew he was writing in an elaborate way. Something that you have in your book is the little paragraph right before the prose summary of the first book about the verse. Do you have that? Yes. And what you don't have is the little explanation of why Milton wanted to explain the verse. What you're reading is the second edition of Paradise Lost. The first edition, there was none of this stuff. There were no prose arguments. There was nothing about the verse. The printer asked Milton to explain the verse, why he wrote the way he did to the readers. And in particular, the printer wanted him to explain that which stumbled many others, why the poem rhymes not. That was why the poem is not written in couplets, rhymed couplets. Now, Milton, any normal writer would say, well, I didn't want to write it in couplets. Not Milton. Milton has to say that he wrote it without rhyme because that's the true way, the true classical way of writing poetry. That of Homer in Greek, Virgil in Latin, the best English drama. And he wants to say not only that, but he wants to say that though it may seem perhaps to vulgar readers that not having rhyme is a bad thing, it's rather to be esteemed an example set, the first in English, of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming. So this is just a little technical explanation. Mr. Milton, how come your poem doesn't rhyme? A lot of people have asked me that, says the printer. Milton's answer, I am recovering the heroic poem from the modern bondage of rhyming. Everything Milton did, he thought of in these grand terms, in terms of somehow contributing to human liberation, which also meant freedom from various kinds of improper bondage, in this case, rhyming. So it's just, this is who we're dealing with, someone who thinks in a very grand scale. What I want to do tonight is I want to try to at least say something about these 5 topics. I feel a little bit about, this is sort of like a Ripley's Believe It or Not performance. Someone once wrote the Bible on a grain of rice. And I sort of feel doing Paradise Lost in an hour or an hour and 15 minutes is a little like that. These are the topics I would like to cover. Whether we'll actually get to all of these, I don't know. But these seem to me the central topics for thinking about the poem. And that if I could do this right, if I manage to do it right, we will talk a little bit about all of those things. So the first thing I want to talk about is the narrator. And this is connected to the notion of the genre, the kind of poem that it is. Everybody knows what genre means. It means the kind of thing it is, of literary thing it is. A sonnet is a genre. A novel is a genre. This is an epic poem, which means quite a lot. And one thing it means is that no writer of an epic poem ever thought he could do it alone. Every writer of epic invokes some kind of deity to help him. Normally, it's the muse. Homer asks the muse to help him at the beginning of the Odyssey, at the beginning of the Iliad. An epic poem is an extraordinary task. Milton makes the process of writing the poem part of the project of the poem, so that he's not just writing an epic poem, he wants you to watch him write it. He wants you to watch him face the challenge of doing this extraordinary thing. The narrator of an epic poem, the person who's telling the story, is often a presence. In Milton, the narrator, Mr. Milton, although he's not named, but we'll see he has some extremely personal remarks, is present to an extraordinary degree. It's not just the epic narrator. We know nothing about Homer. We know something about Virgil, but not because of anything he told us in the Aeneid. Milton tells us a huge amount about himself and about what it meant to him to be writing this poem in the poem. So the narrator is a character in the poem. And what this means in terms of reading the thing is there are 4 different places where Milton begins a book of the poem with a first-person account of the process of writing and the process of writing for him. And these are extraordinary moments. This happens in Book 1, Book 3, Book 7, and Book 9. 1, 3, 7, 9. Okay, here's my first question to you. What's striking about that sequence? What's missing? 5. 5. It's not, you expect, okay, you get it, I see he's doing it in odd books. But somehow 4 and 5 are continuous. He wanted that to be continuous. He didn't want to interrupt the flow there, just as he didn't want to interrupt the flow at 11. But these moments, 1, 3, 7, 9, are moments where Milton steps forward, steps onto the stage himself, and tells you about what it is he thinks he's doing, or in some cases, thinks he has done. Now, let's look at the very beginning of the poem. Does everybody have the text? Well, if you have it, open it to Book 1, line 1. And if you don't have it, try to look on with somebody. Now, all traditional epic poems have an epic hero who's named right at the beginning. The Homeric poems, the first line of the Iliad is, "Sing, muse, of Achilles' wrath," of the anger of Achilles. The Odyssey begins, "Help me tell the story, muse, of Odysseus, that man skilled in the ways of the world." The Aeneid begins, "I sing of military things and the hero, the man, the man." The man is always mentioned in the first line. So here we have Milton doing it, but instead of it being the man, it's man in general, of man's first disobedience. So suddenly we just already know we have a very different kind of poem. It's not a poem about a guy named Odysseus who was a really wily guy, great liar, etc., or Achilles who was a really angry warrior. But it's put in these generic terms of man's first disobedience. It's more abstract than these poems, more general. And we'll see that as this little initial, what you'd call a proem, continues. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit. Now, one of the things that is important about poetry is line breaks. The famous utilitarian Jeremy Bentham, who didn't like poetry, naturally, said, well, someone asked Bentham, how do you know if something's a poem? Bentham said, well, if it doesn't go all the way to the right-hand margin, it's probably a poem. And Bentham was a very smart guy. He was right. He's right. The line break is crucial to poetry, that it doesn't go all the way to the right-hand margin. Now, normally, it doesn't go all the way to the right-hand margin because it has a meter. But still, the line break is crucial. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit, line break. So at that moment, you don't know what's coming. And one advantage of doing the kind of thing that Milton does here, having a line break with no punctuation, is you have this moment of suspension at the end of the line. So, okay, now here's your first chance to be smart. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit. What could that suggest? If that were a line just all by itself, you read that all by itself, what might you think the poem is going to be about? Of man's first disobedience and the fruit. In other words, the question is, why does he want to end the line with fruit hanging there, so to speak? This is actually hard. Anybody have a thought? Wave your hand around violently so I can see it. Yeah, violent waver in the second row.
Maybe he wants to describe what the fruit gave man, like the knowledge of good and bad in the Bible. Maybe he's going to tell us what good and bad are.
Okay, okay. I think that's right. So fruit there would mean, see, one of the interesting things about fruit is it could mean something like of man's first disobedience and the result. And the fruit could be a good thing there. It could be what positive thing comes out of it. See, that line gives you a sort of fruit there has a kind of ambiguous status. You say, well, the fruit of all our hard work is we get a diploma, right? A fruit of going to high school or going to college is you get your diploma. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit, you're not sure whether the fruit there is a good or a bad thing. And that's something that Milton, that right at the beginning of the poem, in this tiny little technical matter of the line break, he's going to be struggling with this throughout the whole poem. If we ever manage to get to the ending, we'll see it come up again. The question, is this the whole story ultimately a story of a good thing or a bad thing? Or is it hard to tell? And that ambiguity is right there in this very first line. And the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse. That, now, this whole long sentence is just doing what? It's just telling the muse what it's supposed to sing about, right? The entire sentence consists basically of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Sing, heavenly muse, you who are. It's this whole elaborate thing is just elaborating on sing, heavenly muse. Milton wants you to get used to a grand style, a style that's leisurely, a style that's expansive, a style that will include lots of hypothetical possibilities. No one ever thought an epic poem was an efficient way of telling a story. It's a way of telling a story, but it's a very complex way of telling a story. It's a way of telling a story where there are lots of local pleasures, where you're not just trying to figure out what happens next. Because after all, we know the story here. You know the story. Milton's audience knew the story even better than you do. Everyone knew the story of the Odyssey. So suspense, the normal, and then what happened? And then what happened? Can't be what epic poems are about. And part of this sort of grand style is to remind us, take your time. Take your time. We're not worrying about the story as such, although we will get to the question of how Milton chooses to tell the story in a second. So he goes on to talk about this muse. And of course, all epic poets, as I said, appeal to a muse of some kind. But this one is the heavenly muse that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai, biblical places, didst inspire the shepherd who first taught the chosen seed, Moses. And then he tells the story of Genesis, how heaven and earth rose out of chaos. And then he says, well, maybe there's another biblical place you like better, Zion's brook. Anyhow, I thence invoke thy aid to my, and this is line 14, to my adventurous song. My adventurous song, that the singing, the writing this poem, is itself an adventure. Normally it's the epic character, like Odysseus, who has adventures. Here, Milton himself is saying writing this poem is a kind of adventure. And why does he think this? That with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian Mount, above anything the Greeks could do, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. I'm going to do something that's never been done. And he's asking this muse, this biblical muse, to help him. And then he turns and gives a second invocation, and chiefly thou, O Spirit. So suddenly we move from a muse to a biblical term. Chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me. Okay, now somebody's going to have to be smart again. What does that mean? That the Spirit doth prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure. What does that mean? What does it mean to say that? You got to help me. Remember, I'm sick. Yeah.
That the Spirit, the Holy Spirit that he's invoking is somebody who prefers piety to sort of display and sanctimony and authority and things like that.
Okay, good. I mean, this is good. Very good. This is a very strong claim that the real temple is the upright heart. Not the upright building, not the fancy building, but the heart. This is Milton, the very radical Protestant, virtually a Quaker, who doesn't believe in church buildings, is violently against church buildings. What he believes in is the upright heart. That's where the Spirit dwells. And he wants that Spirit, who prefers the upright heart to anything, before all temples, to instruct him. For thou knowest, thou from the first was present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like sat brooding on the vast abyss, and madest it pregnant. So he wants the Spirit that moved over the waters of chaos at the beginning of Genesis to help him tell his story. Now, which really raises an amazing question. Is Milton writing the Bible? He's asking the Spirit that inspired the Bible to inspire him. Now, one of the odd things about the English tradition is that for many people, Paradise Lost has supplanted the Bible. That you ask people about the fall story, they tell you the story in Paradise Lost, not the story in the Bible. And it's a real question. What did Milton think he was doing? I mean, this is an extraordinarily audacious claim. Is he writing a supplement to the Bible? Is he writing a prequel to it, as we would say about movies? Is he writing an equivalent to it? In other words, to say that his muse is the Spirit who inspired the Bible is an extraordinary claim. And that's what he's claiming. What in me is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support. That to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. Now, the strange thing about that is normally what an epic poet needs the muse to help him with is to tell the story. Homer says in the Odyssey, help me, muse, lift the great song again, the great song of Odysseus' homecoming. it's the story that's hard to tell. It's such an elaborate thing. But instead, Milton asks not for help with telling the story here, even though he said it's a story that no one's ever told before, except, of course, the Bible. But he's filling in the Bible. He's going to fill in a lot of gaps, things that aren't in the Bible. But what he asks for help with is to assert an argument, that he doesn't want to just tell a story. He wants to make a point. So already this is a very complex thing, that he's not just a poet wanting to tell a grand story, which is hard to tell, even though everyone knows it. Partly it's hard to tell because everyone knows it. But he also wants to make a point. He wants to justify the ways of God. He, John Milton, is going to justify the ways of God. Now you might say, this is a pretty grand task to take on. And Milton would say, well, yes. Well, yes. But now, saying that he's going to justify the ways of God to men implies what about the ways of God?
They're knowable.
Well, they're knowable by Milton, maybe. But what else? Why do they need justifying? Somebody not in the first row. Yeah, in the back there.
Because men don't understand them.
Got to speak up, kid.
Because men don't understand them.
Because,
Men don't understand them.
okay, because men don't understand them and because they might need justifying. The world might look lousy. In other words, if you looked around and thought, oh, what a wonderful world, everything's terrific, you wouldn't have to justify God's ways. You'd say, oh, well, it's obvious what a wonderfully benign creator there must be. But if you look around and see war, chaos, etc., the defeat of, for instance, everything you held valuable, and we'll see Milton is in that kind of situation, God's ways might need some justifying. You don't have to justify God's ways if they're obvious. Okay, unless somebody wants to ask something, I'm going to move on to the next prologue, which is Book 3. Now, the beginning of Book 3, we come from Milton's just described Satan flying through chaos, or flying, waiting, doing all sorts of maneuvers to get through this chaotic place called chaos. And it's all dark and confused and whatnot. And then suddenly we emerge into the light. And Milton sings this kind of song to light, Hail, Holy Light. He talks about the special status of light at the beginning of Genesis, where let there be light is the first divine act before the sun is created. So this is a light that who knows where it comes from. He talks about how he feels better now that he's gotten out of chaos in the poem. But he's talking about light and how he, this is line 19 in Book 3, I sung of chaos and eternal night, taught by the heavenly muse to venture down the dark descent and up to reascend. And then he says to light, thee I revisit safe and feel thy sovereign vital lamp. But thou revisitst not these eyes that roll in vain. And suddenly Milton is telling us, wants us to know that he, the narrator of this poem, is blind. He wants us to know this. Why is he telling us this? And he gives us this extraordinary evocation of what it means to be blind. This is around line 40, the beginning of Book 3. Thus with the year seasons return, but not to me returns day, or the sweet approach of even, or morn, or sight of vernal of summer bloom, or summer's rose, or flocks, or herds, or human face divine. None of those things, none of those ordinary pleasures of seeing the world, seeing other people. But cloud instead, an ever-during, everlasting dark, surrounds me from the cheerful ways of men, cut off. From the cheerful ways of men, cut off. And this sense of isolation is so deep here, created by his blindness in this case. And the book of knowledge fair presented with a universal blank of nature's works, to me expunged and raised, this tremendous source of knowledge, not there, looking around at the world. And wisdom at one entrance quite shut out. Now, okay, that's the pivotal line. Wisdom at one entrance quite shut out. What does that imply? As he's telling you, he's saying, I can't see the world. I can't get knowledge that way. Wisdom at one entrance quite shut out. What does that imply? At one entrance meaning? His eyes, but what else does it imply? Come on, somebody's got to get this.
It's another entrance.
There's another entrance, of course. There's another entrance. But you wonder, what could it be? I mean, it's easy to understand how you learn by sight. What could the other entrance for wisdom be? And then we get the really extraordinary claim. I mean, after this poignant evocation of blindness as isolation, as being cut off, cut off, cut off. So much the rather thou, celestial light, shine inward, and mind through all her powers irradiate. There plant eyes. So he wants these special internal eyes. All mist from thence purge and disperse. So he doesn't ask for his sight back. You'd think if he was going to pray for something, he'd pray for his sight back. But instead he prays for this special kind of inward sight. That I may see, the blind man, see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. Now, what are these things invisible to mortal sight? Well, the whole story of Satan's fall, the whole story of the war between the angels. Why are those things invisible to mortal sight? We know you can see angels. Why are they invisible? This requires someone actually to really be smart. Why are they invisible to mortal sight? This is a trick question. Why?
Can't hear.
Why are these? Did I do something bad?
No, can't hear you.
No, but did I do something to the microphone?
No, you're fine. Just
Okay. What does he mean that these are things invisible to mortal sight? Why are they invisible? Angels can be seen. Adam sees the angels. Who's dead? They're presumably immortal. This is a trick question.
Man hasn't been created.
Man hasn't been created yet. You got it. This is invisible to mortal sight because there are no mortals yet. One of the strange things, we'll get to this, one of the strange things about the way this story is told is how much stuff happens before the main event. Namely, you're going to write this poem about the fall of man. What book of the poem does the fall happen in? Everybody, just sing out. Everybody should know this. What book?
Genesis.
What book of Paradise Lost? Book 9. Book 9. Out of how many? 12. Okay. Sorry? Initially 10, then he broke it up into 12 in the version we're reading. So one thing to ask is, why does it take him so long to get to, after all, the poem's called Paradise Lost. How come it takes him 3/4 of the poem before he gets to the topic of the poem? And all of this stuff that happens before the fall basically happens before the creation of man. So that's why it's invisible, that you have to be, there are no human witnesses. Except, of course, John Milton, inspired by this special muse, who's going to tell him, the blind man, give him, the blind man, this special sight. Well, I won't go on with the poems, but I urge you to look at them. The prologue to Book 7 talks about Milton's actual situation, historical situation, where he feels not just cut off from the world by his blindness, but cut off from the political and social world that he sees around him, as someone who was against an established church, against monarchy, against virtually everything that was restored in England after the English Revolution. Milton was a professional revolutionary for 20 years of his life, went blind, writing pamphlets defending the execution of King Charles. 11 years after that happens, the monarchy is restored, the established church is restored, the regicides, the people who were responsible for executing the king, are mostly killed. Oliver Cromwell's body is dug up and desecrated. Milton is jailed, could have been executed, wasn't, but is deeply isolated and feels this poem is only going to be, is a testimony to what people should want, not what they do want. Okay, let's move on to, and then when you look at, I would urge you to look at the prologue to Book 9 also and see what he's concerned about there. All right, let's move on to our second topic. We want to ask, why does Milton tell the story the way he does? Why does he want to begin with Satan chained to the burning lake? Why does he want to begin that way? Is that the beginning of Satan's story? Is it? What's Satan's story? Tell me Satan's story. How did he get there? Do we know in the poem? We don't? Some people know, some people don't. Does anybody know how he got there? He lost the war. Who said that? Yeah, he lost the war with God. That's right. Where is the war with God narrated in the poem? Remember? It's in Book 6, Books 5 and 6. So first we see him in this situation, and then we find out how he got there. So the question is, why does Milton want to start with Satan there, having lost the battle with God, as the beginning of the poem? And it's an amazing moment when, after all of this narrative, the invocation, and then the continuity with the mention to the mention of the story of the battle, and then all of a sudden, the narrator stops talking, and at line 84, Satan with bold words, breaking the hard silence, thus began. Suddenly, someone other than the narrator speaks. There's another voice in the poem. And the first voice we hear in the poem, other than Milton's, is Satan's. So there are a whole set of questions we want to ask. Why begin with Satan in this situation? Why not tell the story in linear order? First, God said, I'm going to exalt my son, and Satan felt jealous and envious and said, how come him? I'm just as good. He raises his battle. They have a battle. He loses, gets thrown down, and then this happens. Why does Milton want to start with this? Start with Satan already in hell? This is a hard question. And I mean, it's not a question this is not a yes or no kind of answer. But why might he want to do this? Well, let's think about the title of the poem, Paradise Lost. The first thing he gives us is someone, a consciousness that's very much like a human consciousness, experiencing loss. That loss is what is the topic of the poem long, long, long before we get to Adam and Eve. And so now let's think about what Satan says. Why does Satan think he lost? He has an analysis of his situation. Why does he think he lost? Does he think he lost because God is good and he's bad? Why does he think he lost?
There's a fix.
Okay, why?
Because God created everything. So
Well, but what does he think of God as being?
Unjust.
Why? But why does he win? Why does God, if God's unjust, why does he win? Because he's just stronger. He thinks it was just a contest of strength, and the stronger bully won. And that's his picture of the situation. The speech ends, the tyranny of heaven. That what God wants is us, the angels, to bow and sue for grace with suppliant knee and deify his power. So as far as he's concerned, it's just a matter of being overthrown by a superior power. And his attitude towards that is that he hasn't really been defeated. This is at 97. Nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change, though changed in outward luster, that fixed mind and high disdain from sense of injured merit. His mind is fixed. He still has the same mental state he always had. From sense of injured merit. Sense of injured merit means what? Means I should have gotten the promotion, right? Not him. That I was passed over for the job, and I'm pissed. That's what he's saying. That's a sense of injured merit. And he says, all is, what though the field be lost? Okay, there's no doubt the battle is lost. All is not lost. The unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. And what is else not to be overcome? The unconquerable will, never yielding. That's victory. Well, Milton's very interested in this idea. This is Satan's basic idea of his situation. It comes up again at around 253, later on in the book, in his third speech. Satan says that he's one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. Then he says the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Now, it's a real question. What are we supposed to think of this? The unconquerable will, a mind not to be changed by place or time. It sounds heroic. It sounds like the words of a fallen champion who's saying, well, you can beat me down, but you can't break my spirit. It's a real question. Why does Milton want to give Satan that kind of language? Why does he want to give him this kind of powerful, heroic insistence on, not on his own strength, but on the unconquerable will, on the power of the mind over circumstances? And I think it's a real question. When he says that the mind is its own place and can make a heaven of hell, you're supposed to ask, well, is that true? Is that true?
Yes.
Can you just decide, well, I'm in heaven? I think this is something, again, I mean, you can say yes or no, but I think it's something that Milton wants us to think about. Wants us to think about, can we just assert that we're in a certain state regardless of our situation. And I think he just wants it to be a puzzle. I think he's putting it out as a puzzle. Anyone who tells you what we're supposed to think about Satan is obvious or easy and is not troubling isn't reading the poem, isn't dealing with the real richness of what Milton is giving us. There's no doubt this is some kind of version of heroism. The question is it a crazy version of heroism? Is it admirable? What are we to think about it? I always think my job, by the way, is to raise questions rather than answer them. So I'm not going to answer any of these questions. You're going to answer them as you read and think about the poem. But later on in this speech, we get a slightly different account by Satan of what it is, what he values in his situation. One thing he values is his own unconquerable spirit. The other thing he values is, as he says at line 260, here we may reign secure, and in my choice, to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. So now this is a moment where, again, you have to ask, does this make sense? Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. What does it mean to be the kind of person who simply will not serve anywhere, anyone, under any circumstance? This is part of Milton's picture of Satan. But again, it's a heroic picture. But it might be a picture of heroic insanity or heroic arrogance. But it's powerful. And it's intelligible. Well, wouldn't you rather reign somewhere than serve anywhere? Well, this is one of the questions Milton wants to try to answer in the poem. Is there a version of service that's not demeaning, that's not against something that someone with self-respect might do? He wants to raise that question. Okay, I'm going to try to move on to my next topic. So I want to be able to say I did this. You see, I want to be able to say that I wrote the Bible on a rice grain. And if we can do all this in this one session, I will feel I've done it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Eden. One of the most extraordinary things about Paradise Lost is how much time there is before the fall, not just in relation to Satan's story, but in relation to the human story. This is another impossible question. Does anyone happen to know what chapter in Genesis the fall takes place in? Well, it's very early on. It's like chapter 3, yeah. I mean, it's just, boom. The world's created, man falls, and on we go. And then most of the book of Genesis is taken up with the story of Isaac, and then the story of Jacob, and then the story of Joseph. I mean, the fall takes about a page and a half at most. What was life like in Eden on the basis of Genesis? Who knows? There's no account. There's just no account whatever. This is one of the biggest blanks that Milton fills in. Just like what happened before Satan came into the world? Well, the war in heaven is something Milton makes up out of bits and pieces of the Bible. Life before the fall is entirely Milton's creation. Entirely Milton's creation. And I think it's one of the really great things and interesting things in this poem. Just like the portrait of Satan, this complex portrait of some kind of heroic insanity, which is both heroic and insane, is part of what makes, part of the achievement of this poem is creating that character. part of the achievement of the poem is creating life in Eden before the fall, and creating a whole picture, not just a minute, 2 minutes, but a sense of an ongoing existence in Eden between Adam and Eve. There's nothing like this anywhere. And we'll see how unusual it is. So there's a way in which I'd want to claim that Eden, the garden, is one of the great characters in the poem. And the presentation of life before the fall is one of the most extraordinary things in the poem. Now, one thing that we know the Garden of Eden allowed Milton to do is describe a fabulous landscape. Poets have enjoyed describing beautiful gardens since the Odyssey and onward. But it's always interesting to see, well, what are the features of the garden? So let's look a little bit at Book 4, which is where we meet Adam and Eve in the garden. But first we meet the garden. And let's look at about line 239 or so. Milton's describing the rivers in Eden. He describes the river at 240 as rolling on orient pearl and sands of gold, with mazy error under pendant shades ran nectar, visiting each plant, and fed flowers worthy of paradise. And not nice art in beds and curious knots, but nature boon poured forth profuse on hill and dale and plain. Well, there are a couple of really interesting things here. Why does he describe the river running along with mazy error? The etymology, the source of the word error, is the same as like in knight errant, meaning a knight errant isn't a knight who goes wrong, it's a knight who wanders around. Errare means wandering in Latin. So he's using the root meaning of error, that it wanders around. But of course, we know the other meaning of error, and Milton knows we know the other meaning of error. So why is he doing this? Why is he making us think of error in a situation before any error, any human error at least, has been made? And then why does he say, not nice art, but nature boon poured forth profuse on hill and dale and plain? What's he saying there? That it's not fussy, but it's abundant. And he wants this sense of almost out of control abundance. That this is not a beautifully manicured garden. This is a wild garden, virtually out of control. And we have to ask, why does he want to present Eden that way? Okay. Now, we view Eden through Satan's eyes, partly. And we're told at line 285, after the description of how beautiful the garden is, we're told that Satan, the fiend, saw undelighted all delight. He didn't take pleasure in what he saw. And one of the interesting things about this poem is pleasure, the ability to take pleasure, is a good thing. It's a satanic thing not to be delighted. Satan is undelighted. So this is not a poem that sees pleasure as satanic, but rather very much the opposite. It sees it's part of Satan's characteristic that he can't be delighted by wonderful sights, beautiful sights. And then we get this description of Adam and Eve. Right after we're told that Satan is undelighted. Two of far nobler shape, erect and tall, godlike erect, with native honor clad. This is line 287 and following. With native of book 4. With native honor clad, line break, in naked majesty. Now tell me what's going on there. With native honor clad in naked majesty. Why does Milton want the line break there after clad? With native honor clad, line break, in naked majesty. What's going on there? This is 289.90. Yeah.
First description of the human being. First description of the human being.
But how is it described? But obviously, yes, of course. But why is it described in the why? I want to know, clad. Why does the line end with clad? With native honor clad. Okay, so there's the question. Exactly. Does everyone get this? With native honor clad, they're dressed how? Well, are they dressed or not dressed? They're naked, but they're clad in majesty. So they're naked, but they're dressed in this certain way. So this, and Milton wants this. And he's insistent. One of the things that we'll see over and over again, he's insistent on the nakedness of Adam and Eve, and yet that it's utterly unembarrassed. And if we had time to do it, I could. I'll come back some other time and give a lecture on Miltonic pornography. There's a lot of pornography. There's a lot of pornography in Book 4. But the question is, why pornography before the fall? Why does Milton insist that they're naked, especially insist on Eve's nakedness? And yet this is all before the fall. What does he mean that they're clad in native honor? There's something about the way they inhabit or the way they carry their nakedness which is different from the world of shame and self-consciousness that we inhabit, that the fallen world brings with it. And that's very important to Milton. He's absolutely insistent. I mean, just look yourself, we don't have time to do it, at how often he insists on especially Eve's nakedness before the fall. And yet, it's not, there's still a sense in which they're clad in abstract things like dignity and honor. And it's supposed to be completely different from the shameful nakedness of after the fall. And if we had time, we could look at the way their let's call it nudity is treated before and after. But Milton not only wants them to be happily naked before the fall, he wants them to be happily doing what? That he insists on again and again and again. They have sex before the fall. Not just once, but they do it all the time. And they enjoy it. And Milton is the only writer in world history who ever said this. I mean, there are various discussions in medieval theologians about, is it possible that if they had stayed in Eden long enough, they would have had sex? And some doctors, but the idea is, no, they got thrown out so quickly, they didn't have a chance. Well, Milton insists, he absolutely insists on on this as a feature of life in Eden. So this is at 743 through 50 of Book 4. He's talking about Adam and Eve going into their bedroom, into their little bower. Straight side by side where they were laid. Nor turned I ween, nor turned I ween, I imagine, Adam from his fair spouse. Nor Eve the rights of connubial love refused. Whatever hypocrites austerely talk of purity and place and innocence. So Milton is insisting they had sex, and it's completely compatible with being innocent. So whatever the fall is about, it's not about sex. It is not about pleasure. That the life in Eden is a life of pleasure. Now, it's also a life of conversation. At 689, we get this wonderful line. Thus talking, hand in hand, alone they passed. Thus talking. One of the other features of life in Eden is enjoyment of the garden, enjoyment of each other, and enjoyment of conversation. And then enjoyment of a certain kind of social life. Who comes to visit them? They have a guest in Book 5. Do you remember who it is? And Eve makes a nice picnic lunch for him.
God.
Well, not exactly. Who is it who has a name? Well, in serpents, he's not in this picture. He doesn't come to lunch.
The angel Raphael.
Raphael comes to lunch. The angel Raphael comes to lunch, and Milton insists. Now, does he actually eat lunch?
No.
No? No? I don't know. Let's look at this. At 433, Milton answers this question. He says, this is at 433. So down they sat, Adam, Eve, and Raphael. And to their viands their food fell, nor seemingly the angel, nor in mist, the common gloss of theologians, but with keen dispatch of real hunger. He just gobbled up this lunch that Eve made for him, this nice fruit salad and various other things that she made. That it's important, just as it's important to Milton that there be consummated sex before the fall, the angel eats. The whole world of the physical is not the problem in this poem. Whatever sin is about, it's not the world of the physical. The world of the physical includes the angelic world. Angels eat. Not only that, but as we'll learn in Book 8, angels have a special kind of lovemaking. So here's my trick question. What's angelic sex like? Does anybody know, here's my gold star. Anyone who finds this passage gets a gold star. Find me where angelic sex is described. Anybody get it? Because this is in Book 8, the continuation of life in Eden is we go from 4 and 5, and then we get the story of the war in heaven, which Raphael tells Adam and Eve, or at least Adam. It's a little unclear whether Eve is there or not. As as part of their sort of luncheon entertainment. And then it goes on, and then we get the creation in Book 7 being narrated by Raphael. And then in Book 8 we continue with life in Eden. And Adam says, okay, you told me this great story, I'll tell you a story. And he tells about his own first moments of consciousness. And then he talks about his feelings for Eve. And they talk about that for a while. And then Adam says, well, now what about you, Raphael? Do you have any love life? Because Adam just talked about how amazing he finds his love life. And the angel, this is at 8:620, turns celestial rosy red. In other words, he blushes bright red. And he says, let it suffice thee that thou knowest us happy, us angels, happy, and without love no happiness. Whatever pure thou in the body enjoyest, and pure thou wert created, we enjoy in eminence, as we have the same thing, only better. And here it goes. Here it goes. An obstacle find none of membrane, joint, or limb, exclusive bars, easier than air with air. If spirits embrace, total they mix. Union of pure with pure desiring. So there's this extraordinary evocation of angelic sex as sort of semi-immaterial sex without the sort of the difficulty of having to deal with bodies. So this is part of just shows you how deeply Milton is committed to the idea that sex is not the problem, food is not the problem, the material world is not the problem. Okay, so then the question is, all right, what is the problem? So now we get to the fall. But one of the things to say about this poem is to just keep reminding yourself of the title. That whatever else you want to say about this poem, it's a poem about loss. And the more seriously you present what was lost, the more attractive the thing that was lost, the more powerful the loss is. So that might give you some sense of why Milton is so invested in presenting life in Eden as a good thing. But now, everyone always wants to say, well, okay, yes, they were eating these, they were having these nice vegetarian lunches, and they had a great sex life, but still, it must have been kind of boring, right? And especially since God wanted to keep them ignorant, right? They weren't allowed to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. What does the poem say about that? Because that's, after all, one of the things that Satan is going to say to Eve. God wants to keep you ignorant. Is that true in this poem? Why not?
It seems that God has provided them with so much things and aesthetically pleasing paradise that should be enough for them to be fulfilling in the good.
Okay, and how do we know that God doesn't want to keep them from knowing stuff? What does books 5 and 6 consist of? Well, the end of book 5 and the whole of book 6 and all of book 7. Raphael telling Adam stuff he couldn't possibly know. That he wants Adam to have the whole picture of the creation of the universe. And then book 8 starts with this discussion of cosmology, where Milton basically has Raphael subscribe to the Copernican picture, the heliocentric picture of the solar system. But Milton's not quite sure that he wants to buy into it. It's still not absolutely proven. But it's pretty clear that he's buying it. So this is not a picture of people living a sort of a life with no development. See, all of the knocks on innocence. Well, it's boring. It's always the same. It's not interesting. Milton gives you nothing like that. Their life in Eden is dynamic. intellectually interesting, sensually interesting, etc. Okay, and then, before the fall, he gives you this extraordinary thing that Adam and Eve have this conversation about should they institute a division of labor to be more efficient in their gardening. Because along with sex before the fall and knowledge and conversation before the fall, Milton also puts work before the fall. He thinks work is part of human dignity. As he says, animals are unemployed. Human beings have tasks, have labor, have work, have projects, which is part of the reason the garden is so out of control, that Adam and Eve are supposed to work it, and then they're supposed to have children who will help them work it, and there's a whole plan there, a whole future, with a dynamism. Anyhow, they have this discussion about should they divide their labors. And a lot of critics think the fall has already happened there, in Eve wanting to go off by herself. I think that's got to be wrong. Because one of the things that Milton's Eden seems to allow is not just all the things we've talked about already, but it allows for spirited conversation. Actually, we can disagree. But in Eden, in pre-fallen Eden, we can disagree in a way that doesn't cause strife between us. We just disagree. We just have different views, both of which are defensible. So I think that it's just wrong to think that the fall happens before the fall. But let's look a little bit at how the fall does happen. Why is Satan successful? Anybody have a view on this? I mean, after all, Adam and Eve are so intelligent. Eve is extremely intelligent, well-spoken, etc., dignified. She's been warned about Satan. Why does it work? This is in book 9, around 685 or so. Why does it work? What's Satan's best argument for why she should eat the fruit of this particular tree? Well, here it is. I'll give it to you in 3 words. This is book 9, line 687. Look on me. Why is that such a powerful argument? Why is that such a powerful argument? Look on me.
He's still alive.
He's still alive, and what else? But even more amazing that he's still alive is what? I mean, if you saw a talking snake, you would think it's pretty amazing also. Right? He can talk. Eve is used to the animals gambling about and being cutesy. They all do this. But none of them talk. And of course he's claiming that he can talk because he ate this particular fruit. So what she's being asked is to take this case and his explanation for it at face value. So the whole temptation can be seen at 684. He says, do not believe. And then at 687, look on me. Do not believe, look on me. Now, forget the whole larger framework. Just believe what you see. Namely, that I'm giving you the right account of why I can talk. So the whole temptation is a temptation to intellectual advancement. To, well, if a snake can speak so eloquently, imagine what would happen to a human being. And then, of course, it leads into a fantasy of not just will she have new intellectual powers, but she might even be superior to Adam. She might even have the pleasure of superiority. And at that point, we start feeling, okay, the fall has happened. When you start looking for the pleasure of superiority. Now, the next question after how it happens to Eve is why Adam goes along. And it's part of the complexity of this poem that while Eve's fall is some combination of empiricism, believing what you see, forgetting certain other things, ambition, etc., Adam falls out of sheer love of Eve. And it's part of the daring of this poem, that the moment which is the most catastrophic moment in human history should be one of the greatest love lyrics ever written. So when Adam falls, he says, this is at 907, he says, quite accurately, some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forego thy sweet converse, and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods? And then the line ends with one of the great words of misery in Milton. To live again in these wild woods, forlorn. Forlorn. So there's no doubt that Adam falls for love. Now, what should he have done? What should he have done? Well, Milton wants us to know here. He talks about Adam submitting to what seemed remediless. Submitting to what seemed remediless. This is at 9:19. That he should, at that point, what he should have realized is, this terrible thing has happened, but I have faith that it could be undone somehow. So that's the mistake he makes. It's a kind of mistake, a lack of faith, a lack of intellectual clarity, but meanwhile couched in this magnificent love poetry, so that it would have taken an almost superhuman effort for Adam not to go along. Okay, so let's now move to the very end of the poem. Because the great question at the end of the poem is, well, is this whole thing a tragedy or not?
It's a tragedy.
Well, there are a lot of critics who think not. You see, and at one point Adam says, and I'll give you the lines that everybody says who thinks that it's that this is basically a happy story. Not me, but the guys who think this say, well, okay, it ultimately has a happy ending because at line 12, 479, 12, 469, after another angel has explained all of world history and how it's just going to go on and on and on, and then you're going to have the apocalypse, which will be good. Adam says, "O goodness infinite, goodness immense, that all this good of evil shall produce, and evil turn to good." And then he says, "I'm not sure whether I should repent me of my sin or celebrate." So a lot of critics have leaped on that line and said, "Oh, you see, it's a happy story after all." Well, but then right after those lines about how it's a great thing after all, we go back to hearing about world history. And the picture of world history that we get is 536:7. So shall the world go on, to good malignant, to bad men benign. So history is a complete disaster. All you have to look forward to is the end of history way, way, way down the line. So the people who think that we're supposed to clap and say, oh, goodness infinite, goodness immense, they're not reading. The poem doesn't end there. And the note the poem actually ends on, which is the note that we'll end on, is the very last lines of the poem are, I think, giving us the tone that Milton wants us to end the poem feeling, pretty much the way Adam and Eve feel. Some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and Providence their guide. So now Providence is their guide, not an angel anymore. The angel has just disappeared at line 640. Takes them out of the garden, then disappeared. That's the last time anything like that is going to happen. Now their guide is Providence, an abstraction, not an angel, but it's there. They hand in hand with wandering steps and slow through Eden took their solitary way. So this kind of sense of, well, it's a loss, but human relationships are possible. Things are possible even in this reduced world. I think that's the feeling that we end the poem with, not a sense of, oh, isn't it great that the fall happened? Ultimately, I think we end the poem thinking, if the fall hadn't happened and we could have stayed here, it really would have been better. Okay, that's it. I've finished my lesson. If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to answer questions.